Hello, welcome to Rob's Models. I'm Rob, and today we're going to be looking at my build of Tamiya's 1:48 scale Messerschmitt Bf109 G-6. And this is basically a post-build review. If you want to watch the unboxing review of it, click somewhere up here. There should be a link for when I've done an unboxing and initial review of it a while back. But now I've built it, what I like to do is come back and to look at a kit again, because you can never really tell exactly how it's going to go together just by looking through the sprues. Just because something's detailed doesn't mean you're not going to have fit issues, for example. But I've got to say, I am liking this. Now, we won't go through the complete details of it because, as I said, I did that previously. But I do remember when I was going through this one, the first sprues, I wouldn't say I was disappointed, but there wasn't quite as much detail as what I thought there would be. And the reason is this is quite a relatively new tooling. This is 2017. And when Tamiya put it out to great fanfare, the idea was this, and the Spitfire they bought it around the same time, was going to be so detailed that you don't need to go down the aftermarket route. So it is quite a bit more expensive than a regular 48 scale 109. However, it's meant to be, well, it's cheaper in the long run because you're not having to buy the extras if you do want to have quite a detailed kit. And I've got to say, when I remember going through the first couple of sprues thinking, well, there's detail, but it's not really up there. But as I went through the sprues, more and more detail started coming out. It must have just been coincidence. Maybe the first sprues were like the top of the wings, which haven't got a huge amount of detail, and the sides of the fuselage halves. But once you start getting into the cockpit, there is a few more bits of detail in there. Plus, it comes with a few little extra bits. It's got its party piece of being able to open the engine cowlings, and also had a masking set as well for the canopy, which was nice. It wasn't pre-cut, but had the guidelines on there, but we'll get onto that a bit more in a minute. But I have got to say that actually I am pretty pleased with how this come out. I live streamed the build on Twitch, so if you've been watching at the time, you would have been seeing me over the course of January put this one together, and it was a good fun build, as with Tamiya kits, as with the Mosquito that I made recently as well. Tamiya kits do, especially the more modern ones, do seem to go together quite nicely indeed. So yeah, pleased with how this went. So let's have a look a little bit more into it. Well, we'll get into the cockpit in a bit more detail so we can see it, but I've got to say there was actually quite a bit of detail in there. I think I was initially thinking it was a little bit lacking, but to be honest, if you had get a further photo etch set, I don't think it would add much more detail of what is actually really visible just from your normal sort of, picking up and looking around. The instrument panel has got detail on there that was dry brushed out. You've got sort of like the controls to the side, the trim wheels, those sort of things. One area that Tamiya always do seem to be lacking in though is harnesses, and I was actually quite surprised to find in here that the only harnesses in here were decals. And I think for a 48 scale, especially with how much detail, to then put a decal harness over the back of the seat, you could get away with it in 72nd scale, I think, just especially if it's going to be a closed canopy. But for an open canopy, it was actually quite shocking to only find out you could put a part, if you didn't want to scratch build or put aftermarket harnesses in, you would have to put the pilot in there. And it seems odd that if you're putting the pilot in, it's a pilot that's all in all his flight suit, all his gear. Why would you then possibly have it displayed so that you can have it all open out like the engine if you've got a pilot sat in there with his breathing apparatus and everything on as well? So I was a little bit confused about that one. What I did do though was just the only bit of basically added extras really on this. So although I'd call this an out-the-box build, but I always think out the box if you just put a few little basic scratch build things. So I did add harnesses just using some lead wire that I flattened and just painted. So that was a quick and simple way, and I've got to say, I think that is a lot more effective just to put those in there. And of course you can go down the aftermarket route and get some photo etch ones or even fabric ones, but to be honest, quick and simple for that. But overall, I've got to say, yeah, good detail to it. So there is some very fine recessed detail, took a panel wash well. There is a lot more detail going on the bottom of it. So the bottom has got a lot more hatches. I have Obviously put some weathering on there. Try not to do it completely, but I always end up saying that and going a little bit over the top with it. So I did experiment with some oils on the weathering with this as well. But I think, you know, try to keep it a bit more clean on the top, and just, yeah, might have gone a little bit overboard, but pre-shading on there as well. It's one of the things where you can't actually really see the pre-shading, but it's on there, which to me is the right amount of pre-shading. You want to kind of lose it, not in the painting process, but in the not when you're actually putting the airbrushing on. You can see it visible there, but once you start putting the weathering on, you kind of lose it amongst the weathering. And for me, that's how it should be done. But there's some really fine detail in there, and it's just a shame that quite a lot, and I found that actually with the Mosquito as well, and it's just because of the type of, you know, aircraft or when they were made, there's not a huge amount of detail on the top surfaces. Most of it is all the hatches and all the panels on the bottom. But that's nothing to do with Tamiya. That is, you know, purely how, you know, these ones were done. So yeah, very, very nice on there. Plenty of decals to go on. I'd say I didn't really have troubles with the decals mainly, but these ones did take a little bit just to get in line. It was more a case of me getting them in line and then thinking, does that need nudging a little bit? And then all of a sudden it goes sliding off. But they do sit quite well, like typical Tamiya ones. They do look quite thick when you first put them on there, but as long as you've got a glossy surface for them to go on, and you're using the micro set and the micro sole, more actually this one, to start getting it all bedding down afterwards, they do tend to sit. The ones on the top of the wings do still look a little bit raised actually, and in hindsight, what I wish I'd done for how simple they were, because to be honest, the crosses are actually clear. The only bit on there is actually the white sort of square corners that actually more give the illusion of the cross. It's not an actual cross itself. What I probably should have done is just done some masking tape, and I wish I'd actually done that and just painted that on white, because that did take a while to get bedded down. One thing that I did do was to actually paint the blue. There's a decal for that, but I thought that's going to be quite thick, especially then in time to put another decal on top of that. So I did paint that one. I'm glad of that. So the decals went down very nicely. There was lots of them, especially over the bottom bits, the little catches where the engine cowling is going to be, quite a few little fine ones. There's numbers that run up the rear of the fuselage here for the numbering the different sections. So it did take quite a decaling job, and I know quite a few people say, well, if you can't really see the decals, they don't bother with them, only put the main ones on. My thinking is, if you're going to spend a lot of time putting detailing and, you know, painting rudder pedals that no one's actually able to see in the first place, it does seem a little bit silly when people will put a load of effort into detailing up a cockpit, for example, when actually here, yeah, I can just about make out the rudder pedals, and that's only because I painted them, you know, silver so they could try to catch the light. But some people put all that effort in and then only just put on the basic decals. I mean, I'm not a fan of decaling, and I do absolutely loathe it with a passion, but it is necessary. Talking of decals, the actual one that went on the spiral on the nose actually went down quite well. And again, it's the typical sort of thing. You got it into the right position and then decided to nudge it a little bit more, and then moved it, and then spent most of the time trying to put it back to as it was. But just got to have the confidence with that. And it did have a few, because it's going around a curve, was a few little ridges to it, but again, a bit of micro sole on there, just a few applications of that just to bed it down, and it went quite nicely. So let's look at what some of the things are that actually make this more unique. Well, first of all, there's options for it. Oh, I'll just point out as well before I go on to that, one of the other things I did add was the wire as well. Not quite too sure how well that's going to show on this camera, but it should show up in the close-up photos that I'll be adding on. What really makes the wire stand out a little bit more is once I put it on, and that's just some thread, a few little blobs of super glue on there. Once the super glue had dried, just dabbed on a little bit of black paint onto there just to make them a little bit more obvious. And actually, I do think that works really quite nicely, and it does make it look like those are the little tie buckles on there. So pleased with that one. Anyway, back to the details. So Various options that you can have on there is the front flaps as well. So got those extended. Apparently they extend automatically in flight when necessary, but you can pull them out. Then you've also got the rear flaps there. So rear flaps, so I've put them in the drop position, as well as the radiator sort of cooling flaps as well. So got those in there. So that's nice. What wasn't an option was to drop the ailerons at the back and the rudder, but what actually no, the ailerons at the back I actually cut off, so that was fine, and then basically just cut them off with the little modelling saw, and then glued them back in place just at an angle again. And with the rudder, I actually bent the tab slightly on that one when fitting it, so it didn't go straight in, it went over at a bit of an angle, only a little bit, but I do find sometimes just adding those little bits, it just seemed a bit odd that that was all optional, you can drop that. I couldn't do anything with the ailerons there, but again, if I wanted to, you could do, so you could have one up, one down, that sort of thing, so like the stick's been knocked over. So that actually wouldn't have been a big job, and to be honest, if I thought about it, I would have done. It wasn't until I was doing those that the idea came to my mind. By that point, I could have quite easily if I'd wanted to. So it is adaptable on that side of things. But the real party piece of this is that you can have it with the engine cowlings open, or you can have it with the engine cowlings shut. So for example, in flight, or as it is presented here. One thing to say, if you are having it in flight, is a little bit odd, but Tamiya don't actually give you instructions of, they basically just assume that you're having it gear down. I mean, it would be quite easy to work out how to do the gear up. And talking of the landing gear, I do find it odd that Tamiya do this, but they still, they insist on all their models of doing circular wheels, which of course you think wheels are circular, but in reality, if it's on the ground, what should really happen is that the weight of the plane would push it, and as these are keyed, they could very easily have done that. Being quite a light plane and the angle of that actually kicking over, it's not really going to be massively obvious. You might see here, there's some little divots that I put here because this is the display for the Mosquito that had exactly the same thing. So when I made this display, I just pushed holes into the clay before putting the grass on top, just to hide that, because with the Mosquito that was a lot more obvious. But I think with the 109 being quite a light plane, it does get away with it. So that is one area to look at. I did consider trying to flatten them off and making the bulge myself, but I thought that would be fine. So let's get on to the real party piece of this. So often you do get aircraft where what happens is you can decide whether you want to have the engine in the open or closed position, and normally you have to come up with that in the building process. However, what Tamiya have cleverly done with this one is to come up with a method of being able to change it as you want. Now, it does make it seem so it's a little bit more easy than in reality what it is. It is a little bit fiddly. It's not quite toy-like is probably the best way to put it. You do need to be careful, and the cowlings aren't the ones that you've got there. You actually have replacement cowlings for it, extra bits for the engine. So we've got some engine detailing, because the way obviously plastic isn't the scale thickness, so these things wouldn't fit in. So we've got some detailing bits on the bottom with an open cowling, and also some little props that you'd have just to keep it open. So at the moment we are in our position of having the cowling shut. So what we need to do is actually, it does say to remove this, but I think we can just slide it forward a little bit. These have got the prop has got a poly cap in, and also so has the housing for the drop tank, because you need to take that off. What we should then be able to do is, let's just these are held, the top one, that is just held on with, actually, no, let's take the prop off completely, do this properly. So then we take this part off, the front of the cockpit then comes off. Okay, so that actually means that we could actually show off the details a little bit more, and it does make it a bit more obvious. If you just wanted to show, for example, you can see the interior a little bit more, so you can see some of the details, but you wouldn't actually have it displayed in this sort of position. and then that slides forward. No point sliding off completely. The bottom bit is held on with magnets, so we can just take that cowling off the bottom. There we go, that's just had a magnet in there. So now we've kind of got to this stage. Take the detailing for the engine. Now what I've done actually is with the engine mounts, they were to be sort of painted with a sort of a grey colour, but there's a lot of greys and blacks going on. So I was looking and I actually found a picture of them whilst they were painted green, basically the same interior green as you'd normally have for a Second World War Spitfire internals. So I used that just to sort of bring out a bit more detail to it, and I think that contrast just does help just to pick out. So who's to say it's prototypical or not prototypical? I believe it is, just because I've found a picture, but that could be a restoration one. So now we're putting on the cowling, which is already in the open position, as well as it gives extra details for the bottom. That should have gone in first, but we can get that in there. Slot that down to lock this in place. There we go. No, that's not straight. As you can tell, this obviously is, there we go. So it's changeable, but not as instant, especially when you don't want to be knocking off all your weathering. At the same time, we can put the prop back on. Just spin that back on. We do have some little ones of these, which actually, I think for now, actually just for ease, you get the idea. That holds up. Basically, those will be the holding them up in place. So now we have it in the engine, basically showing off position. In fact, what we can do is actually we won't, because this now, the drop tank, doesn't quite fit on whilst the engine cowling at the bottom is open, so that's why that's actually removable. And if we were going to be displaying it like this, we'd then put in those little props in there as well. So that, I've got to say, is I've got, definitely a nice way to show it off with the engine cowlings open. So you've got the cowlings open at the top, gold wing ones, and the bottom one dropped down as well. So I've got to say that is actually quite a nice way to display it. And you can obviously see there's detail on both sides, but most detail probably going to be, you're viewing it, going to be from the port side. So you can look in there, there's actually a bit more detailing on the engine on that side. Plus also you've got some of the exhaust and things going on underneath as well. So that would be accessible from there. So if you've got any maintenance crew, that sort of thing, and this is why I think it's odd that naturally in this position, which I think quite a few people would have it displayed in, you're going to have the engine open, you're going to have the cockpit open, but they're actually saying that you'd put a pilot in there who is all fully dressed with his breathing apparatus on. Would seem a little bit odd in a plane which obviously parked up undergoing some engine maintenance. So that side, I mean, as I say, it's just one of those little quirky things. I will mention as well, one of the extras, of course, was the masking set that come in there. I've got to say, being the 109, quite a lot of the panes are just simple rectangles, and you could very easily mask that up just with masking tape. There's no complex curves, no real bends to sort of be going around. There's a little bit here and there, but you do get a little square tape with the printed on, and just with a scalpel it's quite easy to cut them out, layer them on. This is the first kit I've ever done where I've actually masked the inside, and it does suggest it in the instructions, not necessary, but normally what would happen is I would put that on the outside, then spray the black colour, the RML black grey, 66 RML black grey, because that's the inside colour of cockpit, and then get on with my normal painting on the outside. However, because I realised this is quite obviously open and it's quite easy to see, I was worried that if I just done it that way, from looking at this angle, you would kind of be looking in at it and you would really see that that paintwork had actually been put on the outside first. And I was a little bit worried about that. So for that main canopy bit, I did actually mask up the inside. As I said, it's quite simple squares and rectangles, so it was quite easy. I think I used the 6mm Tamiya tape, which actually fitted quite well in one of the directions as well. So not a massive job, and actually well worth it. And for ages I'd always thought it was a bit pointless when people mask up the inside cockpits, but for this one, suddenly it made sense. So that, I've got to say, is done. Painted it using the Vallejo Model Layout paints, and got the set of the Luftwaffe colours. And basically you just really need, in reality, if you're thinking of getting this set, you can actually just have pretty much for all Luftwaffe the RML 66, RLM 66, I always get them the wrong way around, 66, 74, 75 and 76, and that's basically the 4 colours on here. The others are variations for later in the war. One, the Luftwaffe were obviously running out and they were just mixing random paints roughly, so that's kind of like later variations. So actually, if you're thinking of getting this, you could just look into just buying those basic 4 colours, and that would be fine, and save yourself a couple of quid, although sometimes it's nice to have a few variations if you just wanted to mix things up a little bit. So that was that. Then panel line was picked out using the Tamiya panel line accent, and I've got to admit, as I'm using that, I am becoming quite a fan of that. I did a little bit of work with some oils, and it was just a cheap set of oils that I've got for about £10 off of Amazon, just to work in some oils here and there, just to basically have a little bit of a play. And that again just adds a little bit of tonal variation. You might be able to pick out, for example, on the that wing there's just a sort of lighter sort of smear sort of coming down. Not parts that you're really going to look at and go, oh, that's really standing out. Although saying that, it is a bit more dirtier on the bottom, and part of me thinks, should I go and clean this up a little bit? But it does give it quite a bit of character, so I probably will leave it there. Yeah, so I don't really think there's a huge amount of what I can say. Just added a little bit of just in the wing root there, just a few little scratches going down to the metal, just of a pilot getting in and out. But I've got to say, I am actually pretty pleased with how that has turned out. So there it is. That is my Messerschmitt Bf109 G-6 by Tamiya in 1:48 scale. I've got to say that was a really fun build. It actually took longer to get going with it because it went straight into the cockpit, and there is actually quite a lot of cockpit detail in there. Maybe I'm a bit more used to when detailing cockpit is to get the photoetch set out, so to be spending a bit of time painting little minute bits of plastic, I just kind of wanted to get on with it, and it just seemed to be the first couple of sessions were just quite slow. But once I started getting the wings all coming together, detailing up a few more bits, and it really started to come together, then the engine started to make sense, and then you start getting the paint on there and that mottling down the side. I was actually really pleased with how it went, and I do think being able to display it with the engine open really does give that extra little bit to it. To be honest, it is a bit of a novelty of which way you would display it. I guess it's nice to have the option, but every time I'm doing it, I'm just thinking you just need one little bit to snap. And it's not a quick, it's not just a case of, oh, let's swip that over. As you can see, you kind of got to disassemble the front part, take parts off. I'm not even going to bother to try, unless I was to be more permanently displaying it, putting in the little stands for it and things. But gotta say, when it is open, there is some nice detail in there, and there is also the potential, if you wanted to maybe add a little bit more. Looking at some of the reference photos, there are a few bits of pipework that could be added into the engine. I did M&R about that, but I decided not to because I wasn't too sure how I'd get them to come out, because obviously you've got to take the engine, some of that detailing out in order to change the cowlings, and at the time we're not too sure how I'm going to be displaying it. So I thought, no, I'm just going to leave it as is, but with a little bit of lead wire. That, to be honest, it'd be a 5-minute job just to add a little bit of extra pipe work to there, and that again could lift it up a little bit more. So that has been my build of Tamiya's 109. This was kit reference number 61117, 1/48 scale. Gotta say, it's a bit more expensive than your regular 48 scale kit. However, if you're someone who normally buys a kit and then spends a couple of quid buying the photo etch to maybe add the extra bit of detail on there, get one of these for a have a bit of an experiment. Try this one, because yes, the kits might be a bit more expensive, but you'll probably save some money, and yeah, in the long run, and to be honest, get a model where at the end of it you're probably thinking you don't really need to have that extra detail in there. So I don't know whether Tamiya is going to be putting out more kits with this sort of detail in there, those sort of options, but definitely a fun kit to do. Highly recommend it. As I say, a little bit more expensive than you would sort of think, but it might sort of give you a bit more value, and it definitely wasn't something where I wouldn't exactly say it was a quick build to knock together on a Sunday afternoon. So I hope you've enjoyed that. Make sure you hit subscribe. If you like that, hit like. Do feel free to ask questions in the comments. I do try to get back to people. Thanks very much for your time. Take care. Happy modelling. See you soon.